If there is anything we know for certain about consciousness, it's that it's a very difficult thing to describe with words. One way to think of it is as the space for experience, the space for feeling, the space for perceiving. Consciousness really is synonymous with sentient life. We owe every experience in these rich, vivid lives we lead as human beings to our conscious state. While there are living things that are likely not conscious, like the mold on your shower curtain or the bacteria in your stomach, for us humans, our consciousness is pretty much life itself. To lose your consciousness, to lose this awareness, this sense of the lights being on, of being ready to receive your surroundings, would be to lose yourself. When we entertain ideas of the afterlife, it's not our bodies that we desperately hope will be preserved, it's our consciousness. I think in our twilight years, we would actually quite willingly surrender our bodies to the dirt if we had some assurance that our consciousness was imperishable, that we could go on being in another form, like a ball of light or a wispy spirit or an ineffable energy, pick your favorite image. Again, when we contemplate death, it's not the thought of losing our bodies that's terrifying, it's the thought of our consciousness being canceled entirely. It's the thought of the lights going off on our experiencing self and this rich, vivid somethingness we bear witness to now being displaced with nothing at all. That would be a major bummer. And I walk down this sort of morbid line of thinking only to emphasize the primacy of consciousness. Nothing you have is of higher value than it. There is no greater gift. Consciousness is the prerequisite for everything there is to be experienced. In this human life, that means sights, sounds, smells, thoughts, memories, physical pain, emotional pain, joy, meaning, all of it. If you are having any kind of experience at all, then it is happening within the space of your consciousness. The funny thing is, though, despite the significance of consciousness, we have no idea how it actually works, the mechanics of it. What we don't understand is how all the little bits of matter that make up our bodies have organized themselves in such a way that they produce mind. How can unconscious bits of matter take on a certain configuration like the human body, and then boom, the lights go on and a somebody is created? We don't get that. We can understand how atoms cooperate together to form molecules, how molecules cooperate together to form cells, how cells form tissues, how tissues form organs, how organs form organisms. But what we can't determine is how all these component parts can cooperate together to transcend their physical, material state and become a conscious mind. It's self-evident that our consciousness and our bodies are tethered together in some way. If your consciousness would like to travel to the grocery store, your body will certainly be accompanying it. But the mechanics of how these two things are tethered together, that part has us stumped. How are our bodies, as just a collection of atoms and molecules like rocks or dirt or plastic, producing this subjective view out on the world? This is the hard problem of consciousness. More formally, it's defined as, quote, the problem of explaining why any physical state is conscious rather than non-conscious, end quote. I first heard of the hard problem of consciousness listening to the Making Sense podcast with Sam Harris several years ago, and I still find it a little absurd that I had made it 27 years without ever learning that the existence of my mind, the existence of the mind writ large, was virtually unexplainable. In high school, like a lot of folks, I studied a bit of chemistry, physics, biology, geology. I learned the periodic table. I learned about terminal velocity. I learned about the cardiovascular system. I learned about fault lines. But at no point in this study of the natural sciences do I ever remember a teacher discussing consciousness. And I guess the reason they didn't is a pretty obvious one. There was nothing scientific to teach on the subject. And maybe it is unsurprising that most people like myself can go years, decades, even entire lifetimes without inquiring into the mystery of consciousness because we never get any distance from it. It's hard to recognize consciousness as the strange phenomenon that it is when we're enveloped in it at all times. David Foster Wallace had this parable. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way. And he nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" As Wallace put it, quote, the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. end quote. And consciousness is certainly one of those realities. I personally consider it to be the biggest mystery of life, but it's so immediate, it's just so right in front of our faces, that it's easy to take it as just a plain old fact of life. I get why we like to theorize about aliens and black holes and multiverses because they're exotic and exciting, but I really feel that the trippiest thing to contemplate is right here. It's just, how are you doing you right now? What is going on right now? At some point along the way here, you may have thought, well, don't we know that the brain produces consciousness? Isn't that the explanation for this big mystery? And it's a reasonable point to bring up. We know what parts of the brain control anger and fear. We know what parts of the brain control decision making. We understand the nervous system and how the brain communicates with the rest of the body. And it's true that we can map many of the experiences in consciousness to their analog in the brain. But that's just it. Our experiences, these events of the mind, have an analog in the brain. But what's going on in the brain isn't actually the experience itself. And it's a cool thing to conceptualize, but I think even a cooler thing to really feel. Consider this. Look around your environment. You may be in a room or a hallway. You may be outside. Wherever you are, look around and ask yourself, are you experiencing your environment right now? Is your environment part of your experience? It's not a trick question. I'm sitting in my kitchen right now. I'm looking around. I see the walls. I see the sink. I see the stovetop. I see the kitchen table. I would say this environment is certainly part of my experience right now. I would say I'm experiencing it with my vision. Now ask yourself, wherever you are, can this environment that you're experiencing fit inside your brain? Your brain is about the size of 2 clenched fists. Can this environment that you're experiencing fit inside your brain? Is this experience really going on inside your head? Is there space for that? The idea that your experience is happening in your brain, I think, was only ever a metaphor for what's actually going on. A metaphor that we all at some point started taking literally. Consider the auditory system in your brain that allows you to hear sound. Yes, that system of nerves and neurons is literally located in your brain. But the hearing you do with that auditory system, the experience of listening to music, of listening to sound, that is not literally in your brain. What goes on in the brain isn't hearing itself, it isn't seeing itself, it isn't even emotion itself, it isn't even thoughts themselves. All those things are experiences. The only thing actually going on in the brain is a very complex electrochemical network of meat. Your brain is just a clump of matter. Your brain is meat. That half of the equation, thanks to neuroscience, we understand, at least largely understand. But your actual experience is mind. Expansive, voluminous, open mind. And that part, we do not understand. Now, if you're still with me, something that's really been blowing my mind recently is just how impressive the UX of a human being's conscious state is, in light of the fact that it's being produced by our brain, which is, again, just this humble little chunk of meat behind our eyes. I mean, think about the composition of your body for a second. When you look inside the human body, you find this twisting, dense mess of biological structures, tendrils coursing with thick, inky liquid, soaking wet organs, all with different functions, this kind of grotesque, decaying network of blood and innards. But the result is a ridiculously clean, streamlined experience for the user. There are so many different moving parts of your brain and of your body. And I mean, as we speak, just beneath the surface of your still, dry skin, there are gallons of blood cycling through you. And despite all that inner commotion, you can lift your hand before your face, try it now if you want, and gracefully sway it back and forth, following it effortlessly with your eyes. Your eyes and your hand alike follow your commands without any latency or static or fuzz. The picture quality of your hand isn't pixelated or glitchy or fractured. It's so smooth, real-time, continuous, clear. I mean, really, you have to ask yourself, how in the hell can meat produce such a flawless form of virtual reality? Isn't it a strange proposition that the human experience and every miracle in its capacity, the countryside at sunrise, Beethoven symphonies, the warmth of a campfire, love, poetry, political theory, your interpersonal relationships with your parents, the stock market, all of these direct sensory experiences, all of these complex abstractions, all the joys of life and all the exhilarating suffering as well, all of that we're meant to attribute to the electric hamburger in our skulls? To me, that seems like some kind of cosmic joke. I mean, if ever there were evidence that we were living in a simulation, it would be that fact. That meat, mere tissue with caloric content, squishy, edible, wet meat, is apparently producing all of this. It can actually all start to feel kind of gross, but the cool thing is that the grosser it seems, the more miraculous it starts to seem as well. I suppose all I'm saying is that life as a conscious biological creature, embodied consciousness, is quite an awesomely weird phenomenon. There's so much here that we don't understand. It can be terrifying at first to face it, but I think over time, if you slowly surrender yourself to the mystery, the awe of it all can bring you a lasting equanimity. You can always return to the absolute absurdity of this human condition as a source of levity. When you're having a bad day, or you're upset with someone, or they're upset with you, or you're racked with envy, or racked with regret, or racked with embarrassment, or you're beating yourself up, there's some real peace to be found in the fact that none of us knows what the fuck is going on here. There's some real peace to be found in the fact that you and everyone you know is just a humble little meat creature with an inexplicable penchant for experience. You stop trying to manufacture reasons why certain things didn't go your way when you realize there isn't a rational explanation for your existence at all. You know, maybe we shouldn't see the hard problem of consciousness as a problem. Maybe the mystery remaining a mystery is important in some way. Maybe it's necessary that we never know what put the being in the human being.